Welcome to NVR. This is one of the many these that we've been performing since COVID came upon us. I'm Brad Spires. I'm your 2020 president-elect. We've gotten pretty good at doing these webinars. We've had a multitude of them. We've had all of our congressional delegation, including Senator Cortez Masto and Senator Rosen. We've had Nevada Treasurer Zach Conine in. We've had 5 property management ones, of which Attorney General Ford was kind enough to provide staff for that. So we're getting pretty good at it, and we've been doing lots of them. This one will be recorded, and you'll be able to access it after the fact. And if those in your office want to access it, we'll be providing that information to you. We're very lucky to have Attorney General Ford with us today. General Ford, we go way back. I think it started the first time that you ran for the Senate that wasn't that successful on your end, but it gave us a chance to get to know you. And I think we were one of the first trade associations to support you in your second run, which you won. And not only did you perform well, you became the leader of the Senate Majority Leader for the state of Nevada. And sir, you've just been a terrific, for us, always had an open door. We really appreciate the access that you've given us and that you've listened to us and been supportive of us. Before we get into the specifics, I'd just like to say as a dad, congratulations on your son's white coat last week. Quite an honor and quite an accomplishment for your son.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I'm still smiling from ear to ear on that. It was great to see. I don't know if I guess you saw the post. You know, he and I have come a long way. I was a single parent with him on Section 8 housing and food stamps. And we've gone from Medicaid to medical school, and I'm so happy for him. So thank you for acknowledging that. We appreciate that.
And you know what? We were going to give you a little chance to do a lead in, and you started that already. If you want to expand just a little bit more about your background, and I think that what you just said, starting out on Section 8 has really allowed you to serve all the citizens of Nevada. So if you give us a little bit more background, sir, then we'll open it up to questions from staff.
Absolutely, Brad. Great to see you again. And again, thanks so much, Rocky. Great to see you and so many, Jenny, and so many other similar familiar faces. I'm Aaron Ford, your Attorney General. Delighted to be here with you. And as Brad led in, I am a proud father. Not just of my oldest son, who is now a first-year medical student, but also 2 other sons and a nephew that my wife and I raised. My middle son, I took him to college last week. He's a sophomore down in Dallas at SMU. And my youngest son is a sophomore in high school here. My nephew Devin, we raised, graduated from Desert Oasis High School here a few years ago, and he's back in Texas. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about me, but I must say, I'm having a hard time concentrating, and the reason why, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, especially after mentioning my sophomore son, whose first day of school virtually was on Monday. And before he even started school on Monday, he asked me about Jacob Blake. I don't know if you recognize that name, but he's now a hashtag. Fortunately, he's not a dead person, but he's another Black man who has been shot by police officers. This time 7 times in the back, in front of his children, and he was unarmed. And my son, before he even locked into his first class, had to ask me about that and asked me why that would happen. So we had to have another talk, as I've so frequently had with my sons over the course of the last 27 years, depending upon how old my children are. And you know, I have a perpetual headache. That's how I describe it. It's like a migraine that just won't go away. And I have it again today because here we are dealing with it. And you know, I'm not going to bring down the meeting by talking about it, but Rocky, you know me, Jenny, you know me. I speak truth to issues, irrespective of audience and irrespective of making people comfortable. It's not my job to make you comfortable, nor to make you uncomfortable. I just want to talk about what's real, and what's real for me right now as a Black man in this society. And what's real for my Black wife or my Black sons is that police brutality continues to exist, as does systemic racism. And you all working in the housing arena know what I'm talking about when it comes to systemic racism. You're familiar with terms like redlining, and you're familiar with terms and issues dealing with mortgages and discrimination of that sort. So, again, I'm going to get off the soapbox, talk to you about what we're really here to talk about and entertain questions, but make no mistake about it. I have a heavy heart as we begin this conversation, and I've said my piece in that regard. So anyway, I'm from Dallas, Texas originally, born and raised there. I went to Texas A&M undergrad. During my junior year of college, I became a parent. 6 months later, I became a single parent. Almost dropped out of college so that I can take care of my son. But instead, I was able to rely upon a government that believed in helping people as opposed to hindering them. And they afforded me the ability to get on Section 8 housing, to get on food stamps, to get on Medicaid, and to get on women, infant, and children. Yeah, men get WIC too. And I was able to take care of my son as a single parent until I graduated from college. I went from almost having 0 degrees to 8 years later having 5 degrees, including a law degree, 2 master's degrees, and my PhD. And now I have sons in college, including one who's working on his MD. So, I'm proof positive of what happens when someone from a place like me, in the city of Dallas, Texas, is given an opportunity. And a government is willing to work with individuals to help them attain the ultimate potential. So that informs everything that I do as an elected official. And beyond being an elected official, that informs everything I do as a father and as an active social agent in our society. So when we had the opportunity to run for state senate, that was at the forefront of my mind. When they had the opportunity to run for attorney general, that was at the forefront of my mind. How can I, on behalf of government, be there to assist and be able to provide what's necessary for people to manifest their best selves? COVID has given us an extreme opportunity for that. One in which I'm happy I was able to reach out to Rocky and to Jenny and your association, as well as others in an association, to work through housing issues in the midst of a pandemic where our governor was saying, stay home for Nevada, but it's hard to stay home if you've been evicted or if you've been foreclosed. Concomitant with that issue are so many other issues, and not any that necessarily pertain to realtors or what you do, but understanding that while COVID presents a danger, sometimes the danger is in your home. And what I've done is to work with other entities on the domestic violence front, for example, during the COVID crisis, to ensure that victims of domestic violence can get free Uber rides to a homeless shelter or to a women's shelter, or working with Aaron's Rents to get 500 mattresses delivered to homeless shelters and women's shelters throughout our state during the COVID crisis, or working with Sherwin-Williams to get 5,000 units of PPE to be distributed to our first responders and to our hospital workers. The Office of Attorney General, we all know, generally speaking, what we do, but we do so much more than that. And I'm so proud of the work we've been able to do, thinking outside of the box and finding partnerships and including people at the table for important discussions on issues that will absolutely affect them. Recognizing that the governor, for example, passes an eviction moratorium is going to have a direct impact on you and your membership, which is why, as I've always done, I think, hopefully my reputation precedes me when I say this, but I've always reached out to entities that I know would have an interest in something that we're going to be talking about. To be sure, sometimes I forget, and sometimes I make a mistake, or I forget a particular entity to get engaged, but you guys are always at the front of my mind when we talk about housing. So thank you for being engaged on that issue. Not sure, Brad, how much more you want me to offer in the context of this conversation, but with
that's
that,
terrific. We'll open up to questions in just 1 minute, but I think you still have an opportunity. You've had a SMU and you've had Texas A&M. There's still room for a Baylor there in the middle for you.
You know what? My SMU guy wants to go to law school, so never know. We'll see.
There you go. That's a good one at Baylor.
Yeah.
All right. First question from our distinguished PAC chair, Mr. Bob Hamrick. The floor is yours.
Attorney General Ford, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciated your opening. Well, both pieces. I guess learning a little bit more about you. Go SMU. My daughter is graduated from there as a Mustang as well. So we spent.
Wow. My wife's a Mustang too. So yeah.
Very cool.
Okay.
So thanks for that, and thanks for also sharing your heavy heart, because I think we all are feeling similarly about some of the things that are taking place in our world right now. So we're with you on that. Specific to the real estate business and COVID, as has been already mentioned, I'll echo Brad and thank you for your efforts and making yourself available. You know, oftentimes we reach out to have a seat at the table, but the reality is that you reached out to us. And we sincerely appreciate that. There were obviously a couple of issues that directives were created around specific to the real estate industry. One had to do with open houses, the other having to do with what you've already referenced with regard to a pause on evictions. And I can only imagine being in your shoes and the governor's shoes and having all these moving parts and decisions that had to be made, how you had to come about making those decisions. I'm curious if you could just share with our group a little bit behind that thought process with regard to open houses specifically, as well as the moratorium on evictions, please.
Absolutely. You know, and we've gotten so many. I think we're on directive number 30 now. So there've been so many that it has slipped my mind that we had reached out to you about the open house issue as well. And I know we worked with you to get actual language that dealt with the virtual open house opportunities and things of that sort. So, but no, that's a great question, Bob. And let me be clear. The same approach that I frankly have with almost everything in my office, I apply to this, albeit with a little bit more scrutiny. When I was inaugurated on January 7th, it was all pomp and circumstance. We celebrated, we hugged, you know, we said hi. I didn't do much work on the first day. I can admit that. On the second day, however, I had what's called an all hands on deck meeting. And I've had one of those on the anniversary of my inauguration this year as well, where I introduced myself to the office and I told them about my areas of focus, my 3 C's, as we call them. The first C related to consumer protection. It's an area of focus that I intended to bring to the office. And I called out by name Ernest Figueroa, who was my consumer advocate, to let him know he'd be very busy on the consumer protection front. The second C that I mentioned was one related to civil rights and constitutional rights and the protection of those, to ensure that people knew that as they interact with our office, either on the criminal side or civilly, that I would be cognizant of those rights. And that if I saw rights being infringed upon by elsewhere in the government, federal government or otherwise, I would step up and try to protect those. And then the third one was criminal justice reform and criminal justice issues. But the second C, I think, specifically speaks to how we approach this, Bob, during the COVID crisis, because these are emergency powers intended to be used during emergencies. And emergencies should be temporary, or at least as limited as possible in terms of time and duration. And we recognize that we would immediately begin treading upon, getting close to the constitutional rights of citizenry in our state, whether it related to saying you couldn't travel as frequently as you could, whether it meant that you couldn't gather in groups of 10 or more, whether it meant you couldn't actually go to church in groups of 50 or more, understanding that the Constitution still has limits on what the government can do, and recognizing that there are property interests that are associated with the real estate market, as well as you know, your rights to your wages and things of that sort that we needed to be cognizant of. So I pay specific attention to my second C in that regard as I advise the governor, and not just the governor, frankly, but also others that are my clients, on the types of things that we have to do to ensure that while we get very close to the line, we do not cross the line. And the reason why is because, you know, the U.S. Supreme Court has recognized that in times of emergency, some constitutional rights do take a second seat to the emergency, or they can be tempered a bit. And so, you know, we looked at this from far and wide, case law as it existed related to evictions, moratoriums, rent freezes, all of this related to emergencies, and some of those emergencies related to war powers, you know, emergencies that were raised during wars, emergencies that were raised during the last pandemic, the Spanish flu over 100 years ago. And we were able to draw upon that precedent to take a look at what we could do here. We didn't have to go back far, frankly. You can look at hurricanes sometimes and see emergency powers being utilized to protect the public. So we would look at these issues. We would try to bring to the table all of those who we could at least think of, and I think, Rocky, I would even ask you, who else needs to be here? I know you should be here, but which other entities who would be engaged on this issue? And initially, I think the Apartment Association was the first person I might have reached out to, because, you know, realtors, I know you sell homes, and it slipped my mind that you also are landlords oftentimes. And so we were able to get the group together and talk about that and speak to it, I think, from a reasonable perspective, recognizing that, you know, it's going to be a sacrifice. And what I said when I ran for office as a state senator is something that I still say. I don't say, for example, and this is just an example, you know, I'll never hurt business. That's not true. What I want to do is hurt you least amount possible if I have to hurt you, right? I want to minimize the pain to the extent we have to engage in something that is going to inflict some level of pain or you know, something on you in that regard. And so recognizing that there was going to be some level of infliction of pain on the real estate industry, we want to minimize it. We looked at it from a constitutional perspective, looked at it from a compromise perspective, worked with you, worked with tenant organizations, and I think came up with more than think, at least on this issue, I guess I should say think, but more than think about that on the church front, for example, where we have defended, every time we've been attacked on our regulations, on our directives, I've had to defend those in court, and we have not lost one. Which is something to me that I'm proud of, because I know how important the seat of constitutional law is to me. And to the extent that I can defend these laws and the courts agree that, in fact, you've enacted a law that does not violate the Constitution, it is a win for me. But who wants to run around saying I beat the real estate industry or I beat the church? You know, who wants to say that? Who wants to say I beat the church? So anyway, Brad, Bob, long answer, but hopefully you get some insight into how I think about approaching these issues.
Absolutely. And I know that they're very difficult decisions and they do have impacts, but those impacts are somewhat understandable for the safety of everyone in the state of Nevada. So we respect and appreciate that. You reminded yourself, or we did, with regard to the open house challenge. It is an area where a lot of agents create business from those opportunities. And so that source of business creation has been eliminated. And some of our members have been disappointed with that. And some of them have made analogies to, you know, builders being able to continue to welcome guests into their models when we are unable to welcome them into our homes. So I'm just curious if you had thought that part of it, were made aware of that comparison, and what your thoughts are with regard to it.
Yeah, no, I hadn't been made aware of that comparison. You know, my expertise is all about analogy and distinction, right? And if there are analogies that are appropriate, absolutely we want to consider those. I just don't think I've heard that particular analogy, and frankly didn't know that home builders were still allowing people in models. I'm not certain that would qualify under the current restrictions, frankly. I shouldn't opine just yet, but it seems to me that the same analogy, the same approach that we took to you all, which is to ensure that not so many folks are around each other, that we don't, you know, help with the spread of the disease, would apply to a model home as well. You know, that said, if that's an issue that's existing, it's something that we'll absolutely, I will take notes on that and reflect back on something, refer that to someone for looking into.
Well, I know that the builders have taken extreme precautions as well. It's just our belief that we too could take those similar precautions and limit the number of people coming through the open houses to allow them to continue to happen. But we appreciate your point on that. And thank you again for joining us. And Brad, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, our previous president and vice chair of the PAC now is Kevin Sigstad. Kevin?
How are you, Attorney General Ford? Nice to see you again.
Hey, Kevin. Good to see you, man.
Thank you. So many questions, not quite sure which one I'm supposed to go to. So one of the questions that comes up is, in your role as the AG in defending the constitutional offices in different matters, how do you do that vis-a-vis the different politics that are involved, the different parties that the officers represent?
Yeah.
How do you walk that line, and where does that put you?
So it's easy, believe it or not. My first job is to be an advocate, is to be a lawyer, and I have ethical responsibilities and duties irrespective of political differences that I may have with those that I represent. And that didn't start with the Office of Attorney General. I've been a practicing lawyer almost 20 years. And you best believe I've represented clients and entities with whom I vigorously disagree with either an approach or a philosophy. But you put that aside when it comes to your job and responsibility of being a vigorous advocate for your client. So to the extent you may be referring to voting issues, for example, and the differences of opinion that the Secretary of State may have vis-a-vis the governor, or that I may have as a Democrat and an Attorney General. It's easy to represent Secretary of State Sigstad on a legal issue when the law aligns, when the law says what it says. I keep the politics out of it. I think I've done a good job of expressing to my clients, my constitutional clients, that they have to fret not relative to my personal opinions on the law or on policy, if I shouldn't say the law, but on policy and politics, because my first job is to represent them as a lawyer. There are times when I'm not necessarily representing a client where I can represent my own personal belief or political belief in the context of being an Attorney General. And that's where my 3 C's come in, for example. Constitutional law, my interpretation of what it may be in an argument that I make in briefs is up to me as a lawyer to make. And as a top law enforcement officer or legal officer in the state, I can utilize my ability in order to do that. So that's the answer, Kevin. I remove political differences when it comes to legal representation. I have to do my job.
I would say these are exceptional times, and I'm guessing that you're being presented with issues that you never had a concept that you would address when you came into office. And I think to echo Bobby's comments, I think you're doing an excellent job, and I wish you luck in the future.
No, I appreciate that. And you're right. There's a lot of difficult things I never thought I'd deal with. I've been a church-going tither for 20 years. I don't miss church. No. I don't mean it like that. I mean, I don't miss. Yeah, wrong word. I go to church religiously. I go to church religiously, and I pay my tithes. And so, having to tell a church that they can't open because I'm enforcing a law that the governor, through his emergency powers, has the authority to institute, is difficult for me. But it's a job that I have to undertake. Notwithstanding the fact that pundits are going to say that I'm, anti-church or something. That's utter nonsense.
Yeah,
it's utter nonsense. I probably pay more tithes than the people who are talking about me than they pay. So, but you're right, Kevin. These are difficult times, things that I never thought I'd have to deal with. I'm dealing with, but they keep me up at night, wake me up in the morning. But I'm glad I'm the one right now helping the state maneuver through this tough time.
I've always believed that people are put in positions for specific reasons. You may not know what that reason is, but I have to agree with you. These are very challenging times, and obviously you've been put in this position for a reason.
Amen.
So one of the compromise positions that we made early on with you in the meetings with you was for us to be in an essential role and be termed essential, was that we would not interfere with any tenants' rights, that we wouldn't show tenant homes at all. The question that we're continuing to get as we've learned more and more how to work within this environment, how to follow the rules for disclosure about COVID, for cleansing, for limiting the folks who we go in. The question that is on so many folks' mind in the business today is, when do you think we will be able to start showing tenant-occupied properties?
Well, that's a fair question, Brad. Unfortunately, I'm not the one who gets to answer that. It's a matter of the governor issuing a directive that either reels back on some of the restrictions, or that can be interpreted to affect a previous restriction in a way that I haven't considered. And Bob gave an example of an analogy that I didn't know about. And if directives, for example, allow home builders to be doing that, then maybe I need to take a look at that to see if you guys should be allowed likewise. That said, I'm going to look to Jenny and Rocky to remind me if there's anything out there that you think has that gives rise to me reconsidering an interpretation. I'm happy to do that. But as far as I know, the governor hasn't issued a directive that would amend that just yet. So the lobbying has to take place at the gubernatorial level on that issue. And I know that he bases his approach on the medical advisory team. And if they say that it's safe to do again, then they will give him the leeway to allow it. And then the last thing I'll say, Brad, is that I also know that he's given some level of, he's deferred at some level to local counties to make certain decisions. They can't go below his standard, but they can make them more stringent. So to the extent there's an interpretation out there that the governor's directive doesn't prohibit it, but a county does, there's a conversation to be had there, I would argue.
We had the dates of August 1st and then September 1st from an eviction discussion and then things that develop, and they've happened actually in some webinars that we've had where you've had staff present, is that the Supreme Court has talked about having a moratorium of 30 days after an eviction for a tenant to appeal the eviction. Has that been brought into your loop yet, sir?
Not that specific phraseology. I do know that the special session passed legislation, right, that allows for a mediation program to take place that the Supreme Court gets to institute and monitor. I don't know if that, Brad, is the 30-day component that you're talking about, but I do know that there has been legislation that authorizes a mediation program of sorts to kick in at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's where the question comes is what is the timing going to be? One of the things that the governor did do that was a very good move that we appreciate was of the 50 million care funds to have 30 million for relief and 20 million for relief from commercial. Were you involved in that discussion, General, and were you supportive of that?
Well, tangentially, I was involved in it. That was predominantly, as I recall, the treasurer who looked nationwide, as I did, for solutions to help people, right? Again, this is an example of government not trying to hinder folks, but trying to help folks, even through tough times, even though having to hinder them in some respect, right? And so all credit, I think, or most credit goes to, I think, Zach Conine for working through the financial components to try to make that happen and bringing to the attention of the powers that be that CARES funds and could be utilized for those types of services. But I absolutely support it. To answer your latter question, of course I do.
Bob, have you got something you'd like to address next?
You're muted, Bob.
Come on,
Well,
Bob, we've been doing this enough now.
No, it's good that I was muted because I was stammering because I didn't have a specific question to ask. But I am looking at the list. There is an interesting one with regard to negative credit issues that have occurred during COVID as a result of COVID are not permitted to influence decisions on an applicant for a rental. And curious as to whether this is a temporary thing or whether it will be a long-term impact. Is this an area where you could speak, Attorney General?
Not entirely intentionally on that issue. I'm happy to, and Rocky, if you wouldn't mind, these questions that I can't answer, if you can get them to me later, I can inquire with folks in my office to see if we have folks that we can get answers to those questions on. I'll say this, Bob, I think as a general matter, the idea would be that these things are supposed to work their way out of existence. We don't know, I mean, hopefully it's an emergency that's temporary, that doesn't become permanent. We just don't know the time frame on this. You recall when we first issued the emergency, it was to expire in 30 days, and then another 30 days, and then so on and so forth. And as the COVID numbers, both contraction and deaths begin to decline, I suspect you will see some of the more onerous restrictions, I guess in the eye of the beholder, kind of pared back a little bit.
Thank you.
Kevin?
So obviously you're facing a lot of issues. Is there anything that we as an organization that can help you with?
You know, help me with using your eyes and ears, right? One of the first problems we had early on was enforcing the evictions, not so much necessarily with your clients or your members, but with others. Bad actors, as you know, can sometimes make it bad for the entire industry. So to the extent you know of bad actors, if you see something, say something. I'm part of law enforcement now, right? It's no problem with tattling. Also, there's no problem with monitoring your own and letting them know that while I won't tattle, I'm going to be a vigilante on this at some level and tell you to stop it, right? We didn't want folks being evicted early on, and we've had to take some folks to court and file criminal charges against some entities who are violating the orders. We got some information from tenants on that issue, but some of those are reports directed from probably your members. And that's important for us to know. As well as if you see another way you can help, Kevin, is if you see things on the horizon, let me know about that. If you hear about what's happening in Colorado that you would like to see implemented here, that'd be helpful. We try to keep our ear to the ground on those things, but I have 2 full-time jobs now: the pre-COVID work and now the all-COVID work.
Right.
And so I'm able to remember everything. So you can help us with that.
So a couple things that come to mind is the impact on a homeowner that can't collect rent, ergo can't pay his payment,
Right.
and puts them in a hard place because they end up with the potential of losing the property at no fault of their own, which then damages their credit, which then hurts them down the line. Certainly, the public policy is there to try and support the tenants, but it leaves the landowner without the property owner without any sort of place to go.
Well, Kevin, let me offer this as a I don't know, pushback of sorts, but maybe a question, right? Because one of the things that we tried to consider was the fact that this is a dynamic situation. When I was in the legislature, I didn't think I had to solve all problems with one piece of legislation. Understanding that there were different options and different pieces of help coming from elsewhere. The federal government, for example, was helping homeowners relative to foreclosure issues. We issued not only a moratorium on evictions, but a moratorium on foreclosures as well, so that there were a landowner or a homeowner who was a landlord, at least they wouldn't be foreclosed. And as I understood it, there was a federal backstop to help them roll in. They were working on something to help them roll in their mortgage, their payments to the end of the mortgage or something like that. The treasurer was working with the 6 big banks, I think he said it was, to help with issues like that. Since you're talking about commercial tenants, we also had a moratorium on commercial evictions, but also on commercial foreclosures, so that the landlord in a commercial context would be able to rely upon that directive to at least avoid being put out of that particular location for lack of payment. If there are ideas that you have for ways now or in the future that we can continue helping folks, with ideas. I mean, one of the things you all helped us with was coming up with this standard promissory note for eviction to be used in the eviction context for landlords to work with their tenants on how they can pay things off in the future. If there are other ideas like that you think could be useful, we're open to pursuing those, to helping facilitate conversations on those. A lot of that I don't get to do myself. I can just facilitate and convene meetings, but I'm happy to be engaged in that.
And there is some legislation that's currently takes that into effect, that if there's a moratorium on the ability to evict someone and it's going to be a hardship on the landlord, that they have the ability to take that to court and let the court decide who's got the bigger burden. And so maybe that's something I don't pretend to think that this is going to end anytime soon. And so maybe that's something that we could move into as we go further. And to your point about the commercial tenants, that's business that I handle, and we're seeing a lot of real hardship in terms of the bars and the restaurants and the gyms and the people that have really been severely impacted by this. And we don't have any really good tools to work with them because of the restrictions that's been placed on them.
can they apply for Co9's program he just rolled out 2 days ago? The business.
We're pushing that out to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the key,
And-
right? It's a dynamic issue with people coming up with as many opportunities, solutions, and help that they can provide. It's again, government trying to help folks while at the same time recognizing that there's some hindrances that we put up. You know, and Kevin, if there's more that we can do, we're open to hearing ideas on that.
And I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Brad, may I ask a question, please?
Certainly, Bob.
So Attorney General Ford, many of the questions in the chat have to do with property management issues, with landlord-tenant issues, and obviously the moratorium. But one is asked that is, I think, appropriate because we do represent a lot of homeowners, landlords that are relying on the rent to pay their own personal bills. And as a result of the circumstances, they're not receiving the income. And so one question that was asked is, do we anticipate that there may be relief for them, being that they're relying on rents that are not being paid?
That's actually a good question, and it's not a bad idea to contemplate or consider. I don't know of anything percolating right now, Bob, but why don't we, I don't know, is something like that existing elsewhere that y'all know of, that anyone knows of? In another state, do they have that type of a program for homeowners that you're contemplating?
Rocky may be able to answer that, or
Yeah, General Ford, I think it was, I think it was part of our, as Treasurer Conine was kind of putting the framework around his program, I think it was one of the topics that we raised, but I don't know whether it was just the parameters that he wanted to put around the program, although I think it was probably more the
CARES Act
component restricted kind of the use. So I think it's probably a conversation with our delegation about kind of loosening the reins somewhat on the CARE Act restrictions,
Got it.
allowing kind of property owners to be able to tap into those resources.
Yeah, and Bob, to your question, I'm absolutely open to talking about ways to help those folks you've described. I don't have all of the answers. I don't have all of the ideas. And so if there are ideas out there, bring them. And in terms of trying to find money for it, there's another issue with that, but working, like Rocky said, with the federal delegation to see what, if they can pass another, CARES Act bill or another, bill to help during this time period, maybe we can advocate together on those types of issues.
Oops.
Rocky, you want to wrap up? We got just a couple of minutes left. Anything else that we've missed that we need to cover from the side that you sit on?
Nothing necessarily on my side, General Ford, but I know we did have a question come in about filing kind of anonymous complaints with your office. I'm assuming that's coming because you require kind of contact point.
Yeah,
if there's
it's tough for us. In fact, I don't think my people accept anonymous complaints, simply because we're also a criminal agency, and people eventually will have the ability to consult, to confront their accusers, so to speak, right? It's difficult. Not everything has to be, resolved via a formal complaint, right? If there are, but the anonymous, I just don't know how we get around the anonymous thing. We have to know who to talk to and who to call back and to get additional information on. So that's tough.
Yeah, thanks. And I would certainly echo Brad's opening comments, right? Just a real thanks to you for reaching out, and B, particularly working with us. I think a lot of folks don't know that the initial iteration didn't cover a lot of the topics that are in the governor's directives today. And that was a direct result of our kind of back and forth and our conversations, educating you on what some of those topics were and your willingness to understand those and work with us. So thanks.
No, absolutely. I want to go back real quickly to a question I think Kevin asked about how you could also help. Look, there's a lot of political banter going on right now relative to housing, you know, suburbs being invaded by people who live inner city and things of that sort. I'm very familiar with dog whistle language. And while this isn't a political speech, it's one that it's appropriate for me to mention that I hear it, and we are looking out for it. And to the extent that type of language manifests itself in actual practice, I need your eyes on that too, right? If you start to see people discriminating in a housing context, you know, file a complaint, let me know, reach out to me. You know, we're serious about this on ensuring that government works for everybody and not just some folks. So I think you get my drift.
Sir, it's been a pleasure having you with us. I think if there's any organization in the state that understands that the right to own a home belongs to everybody, it's us. And it's our intention to never have any discussions with you that we failed to see the diversity of homeowners.
I appreciate that. Absolutely.
Your closing comments?
Well, thanks again. I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to talk. You know, I've tried to make it a point to reach out to all of our constituency groups just to hear from them, figure out what my office can be doing better, what we're doing that is helpful, unhelpful, and just to hear what the issues are that you are encountering. And so thank you for the feedback on that. This won't be our last conversation. My door is open, both literally and virtually. So reach out whenever, guys.
Thank you so much for your time, sir. And for those that were on the call, we'll be posting this on NevadaRealtors.org website, our Facebook page, and the YouTube channel. Thank you all, and I truly appreciate the members of the panel for your time. And I got to tell you, without our staff at Nevada Realtors, we would be up a creek in this environment. So I can't thank enough Teresa and her staff, and Rocky, you and your staff. You've allowed us to continue to do business to help people live the American dream. Thank you, Rocky. Thank you all, and thank you.